Section 4 of the Adventures of Johnny Chuck. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Adventures of Johnny Chuck by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 13. Polly and Johnny Chuck Go House Hunting. Johnny Chuck was happy. Yes, sir, Johnny Chuck was happy. So happy that he felt like doing foolish things. You see, Johnny Chuck loved Polly Chuck, and he knew now that Polly Chuck loved him. He had known it ever since he had fought with the foolish little dog who had dared to frighten Polly Chuck. After the fight was over, and the little dog had been sent home ki-yi-yiing, Polly Chuck had crept out of the old stone wall where she had been hiding, and snuggled up beside Johnny Chuck and looked at him as if she thought him the most wonderful Chuck in all the world, as indeed she did. And Johnny had felt his heart swell and swell with happiness until it almost choked him. So now once more Johnny Chuck began to think of a new home. He had forgotten all about seeing the world. All he wanted now was a new house, built just so, with a front door and a hidden back door, and big enough for two, for no more would Johnny Chuck live alone. So, with shy little Polly Chuck by his side, he began to search for a place to make a new home. The more he thought about it, the more Johnny wanted to build his house over by the lone elm tree where he had first seen Polly Chuck. It was a splendid place. From it you could see a great way in every direction. It would be shady on hot summer days. It was near a great big patch of sweet clover. It seemed to Johnny Chuck that it was the best place on all the Green Meadows. He whispered as much to Polly Chuck. She turned up her nose.
"It's too low,"
said she. "Oh," replied Johnny, and looked puzzled, for really it was one of the highest places on the Green Meadows.
"Yes," said
Polly in a brisk, decided way.
"it's altogether too low. Probably it is wet."
"Oh," said Johnny once more. Of course he knew that it wasn't wet, but if Polly didn't want to live there, he wouldn't say a word. Of course not.
"Now there's a place right over there," continued Polly. "I think we'll build our house right there."
Johnny opened his mouth to say something, but he closed it again without speaking and meekly trotted after Polly Chuck to the place she had picked out. It was in a little hollow. Johnny knew before he began to dig that the ground was damp, almost wet. But if Polly wanted to live there, she should, and Johnny began to dig. By and by he stopped to rest. Where was Polly? He looked this way and that way anxiously. Just as he was getting ready to go hunt for her, she came hurrying back.
"I found a perfectly lovely place for our new home," she cried.
Johnny looked ruefully at the hole he had worked so hard to dig. Then he brushed the dirt from his clothes and followed her. This time Johnny had no fault to find with the ground. It was high and dry. But Polly had chosen a spot close to a road that wound down across the Green Meadows. Johnny shook his head doubtfully, but he began to dig. This time, however, he kept one eye on Polly Chuck, and the minute he found that she was wandering off, he stopped digging and chuckled as he watched her. It wasn't long before back she came in great excitement. She had found a better place. So they wandered over the Green Meadows, Polly leading the way. Johnny had learned by this time to waste no time digging, and he had made up his mind to one thing. What do you think it was? It was this. He would follow Polly until she found a place to suit him, but when she did find such a place, she wouldn't have a chance to change her mind again. Chapter 14. A New Home at Last. Home, no matter where it be, or it be big or small, is just the one place in the world that dearest is of all. Johnny Chuck was thinking of this as he worked with might and main. It was a new house that he was building, but already he felt that it was home, and every time he thought of it he felt a queer little tugging at his heart. You see, while it was his home, it was Polly Chuck's home too, and that made it doubly dear to Johnny Chuck even before it was finished. And where do you think Johnny was building his new home? It was clear way over on the edge of Farmer Brown's old orchard. Yes, sir, after all the fuss Johnny Chuck had made over any other Chuck living on the Green Meadows, and after driving the old gray Chuck back to the Old Pasture, Johnny Chuck had left the Green Meadows himself. It wasn't of his own accord that Johnny Chuck had left the Green Meadows. Oh, no, indeed. He loved them too well for that. But he loved Polly Chuck more, and although he had grumbled a little, he had followed her up to the Old Orchard, and now they were going to stay there. Sometimes Johnny shivered when he thought how near were Farmer Brown and Farmer Brown's boy and Bowser the Hound. He had never been so far from his old home on the Green Meadows before, and it was all very strange up here. It was very lovely, too. Besides, it was in this very old orchard that Polly Chuck had been born, and she knew every part of it. Johnny felt better when he found that out, so he set to work to build a home, and this time he meant business. Polly Chuck could change her mind as many times as she pleased. That was going to be their home, and that was where they were going to live. Now Johnny Chuck had grown wise in the ways of the world since he first ran away from the home where he was born. Twice since then he had built a new home, and now this would be better than either of the others. He paid no heed to Polly when she pouted because he did not dig where she wanted him to. He went from tree to tree, big old apple trees they were, and at the very last tree, way down in a corner near a tumbled-down stone wall, he found what he wanted. Two spreading roots gave him a chance to dig between them. Polly watched him get ready for work, and she pouted some more.
"It would be a lot nicer out in that grassy place, and a lot easier to dig," said she.
Johnny Chuck smiled and made the dirt fly.
"It certainly would be easier to dig," said he when he stopped for breath. "Easier for me, and easier for Bowser the Hound or for old Granny Fox, if either wanted to dig us out. Now these old roots are just far enough apart for us to go in and out. They make a beautiful doorway. But Bowser the Hound cannot get through if he tries, and he can't make our doorway any larger. Don't you see how safe it is?"
Polly Chuck had to own up that it was safer than a home in the open could possibly be, and Johnny went on digging. He made a long hall down to the snuggest of bedrooms, deep, deep down underground. Then he made a long back hall, and all the sand from this he carried out the front way. By and by he made a back door at the end of the back hall, and it opened right behind a big stone fallen from the old stone wall. You would never have guessed that there was a back door there. His new house was finished now, and Johnny Chuck and Polly Chuck sat on the doorstep and watched jolly, round, red Mr. Sun go to bed behind the Purple Hills, and were happy. Chapter 15 Sammy Jay Finds the New Home. Johnny Chuck was missed from his old home on the Green Meadows. If he had known how much he was missed, he certainly would have tried to go back for at least a call on his old neighbors. There had been great surprise when it had been discovered that Jimmy Skunk was living in Johnny's old house. And at first some of the little people were inclined to look at Jimmy a wee bit distrustfully when he told how Johnny Chuck had given away his house. When Johnny sent back word by the Merry Little Breezes that it was true, they believed Jimmy Skunk and forgot the unpleasant things that they had begun to hint at about him. But they one and all thought that Johnny Chuck must be crazy. Yes, sir, they thought that Johnny Chuck must be crazy. They were sure of it when the Merry Little Breezes brought word of how Johnny had started out to see the world. But everybody was so busy about their own affairs in the beautiful bright springtime that they couldn't spend much time wondering about Johnny Chuck. They missed him every time they passed his old house and then forgot him. That is, most of the little people did. Peter Rabbit didn't. Peter used to stop every day to gossip with Johnny Chuck and tell him all the news, and now that Johnny Chuck was no longer there, Peter missed him greatly. Jimmy Skunk was always asleep or off somewhere. Besides, he was such a traveler that he knew all the news almost as soon as Peter himself. The Merry Little Breezes told Peter that Johnny Chuck was still on the Green Meadows, hunting for a new home, so Peter made up his mind that just as soon as Johnny got settled, Peter would hunt him up and call. You see, he never dreamed that Johnny would leave the Green Meadows, and he thought that of course the Merry Little Breezes would tell him just where Johnny Chuck's new house was, whenever it was built. But there is where Peter made a mistake. The Merry Little Breezes are the friends of all the little meadow and forest people, but they wouldn't be very long if they told everything that they found out. Their merry tongues they guard full well, and things they shouldn't never tell, for long ago they learned the way to keep a secret night and day. And so when they found Johnny Chuck's new house in the corner of Farmer Brown's old orchard, they promised Johnny that they wouldn't tell anybody, and they didn't. So it was a long time before anyone else found out what had become of Johnny Chuck, for no one thought of looking in the corner of the old orchard. The Merry Little Breezes used to come every day and bring Johnny Chuck the news, and he and Polly Chuck would laugh and tickle as they thought of Peter Rabbit hunting and never finding them. Then one morning, as Johnny Chuck sat on his doorstep, half dozing in the sun with his heart filled with contentment, he had happened to look up straight into two sharp eyes peering down at him from among the leaves of the apple tree under which he had built his house. He knew those eyes. They were such sharp eyes that they were unpleasant. He didn't even have to look for the blue and white coat of the owner to know who had found his snug home. But he pretended to keep right on dozing, and pretty soon the owner of the eyes disappeared without making a sound.
"Oh, dear,"
sighed Johnny Chuck.
"Now the whole world will know where we live, for that was Sammy Jay."
Then his face brightened as he added,
"Anyway, he didn't see Polly Chuck, and he doesn't know anything about her, so I'll keep twice as sharp a watch as before."
Chapter 16 Sammy Jay Plans Mischief Mischief may not mean to be really truly bad, but somehow it seems to make other people sad. Does a mean unpleasant thing and tries to think it fun. Then at last it runs away when trouble has begun. Of all the little people who live in the Green Forest and on the Green Meadows, none is more mischievous than Sammy Jay. It seems sometimes as if there was more mischief under that pert little cap Sammy Jay wears than in the heads of all the other little meadow and forest people put together. When he isn't actually in mischief, Sammy Jay is planning mischief. You see, it has grown to be a habit with Sammy Jay. And habits, especially bad habits, have a way of growing and growing. Now, Sammy Jay had no quarrel with Johnny Chuck. Oh, my, no. He would have told you that he liked Johnny Chuck. Everybody likes Johnny Chuck. But as soon as Sammy Jay found Johnny Chuck's new house, he began to plan mischief. He didn't really want any harm to come to Johnny Chuck, but he wanted to make Johnny uncomfortable. That is Sammy Jay's idea of fun, seeing somebody else uncomfortable. So he slipped away to a thick hemlock tree in the Green Forest to try to think of some plan to tease Johnny Chuck and to make him uncomfortable. Of course, he knew that Johnny had hidden his new house in the corner of Farmer Brown's old orchard because he wanted it to be a secret. He didn't know why Johnny wanted it a secret, and he didn't care. If Johnny wanted it a secret, it would be fun to tell everybody about it. As he sat wondering who he should tell first, he saw Reddy Fox trotting down the Lone Little Path.
"Hi, Reddy Fox!"
he shouted.
Reddy looked up.
"Hello, Sammy Jay. What have you got on your mind this morning?"
said Reddy.
"Nothing much,"
replied Sammy Jay.
"What's the news?"
Reddy grinned.
"There isn't any news," said he. "I was just going to ask you the same thing."
It was Sammy Jay's turn to grin.
"Just as if I could tell you any news, Reddy Fox! Just as if I could tell you any news!"
he exclaimed.
"Why, everybody knows that you are so smart that you find out everything as soon as it happens."
Reddy Fox felt flattered. You know people who do a great deal of flattering themselves are often the very easiest to flatter if you know how. Reddy pretended to be very modest, but no one likes to be thought smart and important more than Reddy Fox does. And it pleased him greatly that Sammy Jay should think him so smart that no one could tell him any news. Sammy knew this perfectly well, and he chuckled to himself as he watched Reddy Fox pretending to be so modest.
"Have you called on Johnny Chuck at his new home yet?"
asked Sammy Jay in the most matter-of-fact way.
"No,"
replied Reddy,
"but I mean to soon."
He said this just as if he knew all about Johnny Chuck's new home, when all the time he hadn't the remotest idea in the world where it was. In fact, he had hunted and hunted for it, but hadn't found a trace of it, and all the time Sammy Jay knew that Reddy didn't know where it was. But Sammy didn't let on that he knew.
I just happened to be up in Farmer Brown's old orchard this morning, so I thought I'd pay Johnny Chuck a call,"
said Sammy, and chuckled as he saw Reddy's ears pick up.
"By the way, he thinks you don't know where he lives now."
"Huh!" said Reddy Fox. "As if Johnny Chuck could fool me. Well, I must be moving along. Goodbye, Sammy Jay."
Reddy trotted off towards the Green Meadows, but the minute he was out of sight of Sammy Jay, he turned towards Farmer Brown's old orchard, just as Sammy Jay had known he would.
"I guess Johnny Chuck will have a visitor,"
chuckled Sammy Jay as he started to look for Jimmy Skunk. End of section 4. Section 5 of The Adventures of Johnny Chuck. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Adventures of Johnny Chuck by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 17. More Mischief. Mischief's like a snowball sent rolling down a hill. With every turn it bigger grows and bigger, bigger still. Sammy Jay had started mischief by telling Reddy Fox where Johnny Chuck's new house was. If you had asked him, Sammy Jay would have said that he hadn't told. All he had said was that he had happened to be up in Farmer Brown's old orchard, and so had called on Johnny Chuck in his new house. Now, Reddy Fox is very sly, oh, very sly. He had pretended to Sammy Jay that he knew all the time where Johnny Chuck was living. When he left Sammy Jay, he had started in the direction of the Green Meadows, just as if he had no thought of going over to Farmer Brown's old orchard. But Sammy Jay is just as sly as Reddy Fox. He wasn't fooled for 1 minute, no, not one little minute. He chuckled to himself as he started to look for Jimmy Skunk. Then he changed his mind.
"I think I'll go up to the old orchard myself,"
said Sammy Jay, and away he flew. He got there first and hid in the top of a big apple tree where he could see all that went on. It wasn't long before he saw Reddy Fox steal out from the Green Forest and over to the old orchard. Reddy was nervous, very nervous. You see, it was broad daylight, and the old orchard was very near Farmer Brown's house. Reddy knew that he ought to have waited until night, but he knew then that Johnny Chuck would be fast asleep. Now, perhaps, Johnny Chuck, thinking that no one knew where he lived, would not be on watch, and he might be able to catch Johnny. So Reddy, with one eye on Farmer Brown's house and one eye on the watch for some sign of Johnny Chuck, stole into the old orchard. Every few steps he would stop and look and listen. At every little noise he would start nervously. Then Sammy Jay would chuckle under his breath. So Reddy Fox crept and tiptoed about through the old orchard. Every minute he grew more nervous, and every minute he grew more disappointed, for he could find no sign of Johnny Chuck's house. He began to think that Sammy Jay had fooled him, and the very thought made him grind his teeth. At last he decided to give it up. He was down in the far corner of the old orchard, close by the old stone wall now, and he got all ready to jump over the old stone wall, when he just happened to look on the other side of the big apple tree he was under. And there was what he was looking for, Johnny Chuck's new house. Johnny Chuck wasn't in sight, but there was the new house, and Johnny must be either inside or not far away. Reddy grinned. It was a sly, wicked, hungry grin. He flattened himself out in the grass behind the big apple tree.
"I'll give Johnny Chuck the surprise of his life,"
muttered Reddy Fox under his breath. Now Sammy Jay had been watching all this time. He knew that Johnny Chuck was safely inside his house, for Johnny had seen Reddy when he first came into the old orchard. And Sammy knew that Johnny Chuck knew that when Reddy found that new house, he would hide just as he had done.
"Johnny Chuck won't come out again today, and there won't be any excitement at all,"
thought Sammy Jay in disappointment, for he had hoped to see a fight between Reddy Fox and Johnny Chuck. Just then Sammy looked over to Farmer Brown's house, and there was Farmer Brown's boy getting ready to saw wood. The imp of mischief under Sammy's pert cap gave him an idea. He flew over to the old apple tree just over Reddy's head and began to scream at the top of his lungs. Farmer Brown's boy stopped work and looked over towards the old orchard. "When a jay screams like that, there is usually a fox around," he muttered, as he unfastened Bowser the Hound. Chapter 18 Farmer Brown's Boy Makes a Discovery Reddy Fox glared up at Sammy Jay.
"What's the matter with you?"
snarled Reddy Fox.
"Why don't you mind your own affairs instead of making trouble for other people?"
You see, Reddy was afraid that Johnny Chuck would hear Sammy Jay and take warning.
"Hello, Reddy Fox. I thought you had gone down to the Green Meadows."
And Sammy said this as if he was very much surprised to see Reddy there. He wasn't, for you know he had been watching Reddy hunt for Johnny Chuck's new house. But Reddy had pretended that he was going down to the Green Meadows early that morning, and so now Sammy pretended that he had thought that Reddy really had gone.
"I changed my mind,"
he snapped.
"What are you screaming so for?" "Just to exercise my lungs, so as to be sure that I can scream when I want to,"
replied Sammy, screaming still louder.
"Well, go somewhere else and scream. I want to sleep,"
said Reddy crossly. Now, Sammy Jay knew perfectly well that Reddy Fox had no thought of taking a nap, but was hiding there to try to catch Johnny Chuck. And Sammy knew that Farmer Brown's boy could hear him scream, and that he knew that when Sammy screamed that way it meant there was a fox about. Sitting in the top of the apple tree, Sammy could see Farmer Brown's boy starting for the old orchard, with Bowser the Hound running ahead of him. Farmer Brown's boy had no gun, so Sammy knew that no harm would come to Reddy, but that Reddy would get a dreadful scare, and that is what Sammy wanted, just out of pure mischief. So he screamed louder than ever. Reddy Fox lost his temper. He sat up and called Sammy Jay all the bad names he could think of. He forgot where he was. He told Sammy Jay what he thought of him and what he would do to him if ever he caught him. Sammy Jay kept right on screaming. He made such a noise that Reddy didn't hear footsteps coming nearer and nearer. Suddenly there was a great roar right behind him. "Bow, wow, wow! Bow, wow, wow, wow!" Just like that. Reddy was so frightened that he didn't even look to see where he was jumping and bumped his head against the apple tree. Then he started for the Green Forest with Bowser the Hound at his heels. Sammy Jay laughed till he lost his breath and nearly tumbled off his perch. Then he flew away, still laughing. He thought it the greatest joke ever. Farmer Brown's boy had followed Bowser the Hound into the old orchard. "I wonder what a fox was doing up here in broad daylight," said he, talking to himself. "Perhaps one of my hens has stolen her nest down here, and he has found it. I'll have a look anyway." So he walked on down to the far corner of the old orchard, straight to the place from which he had seen Reddy Fox jump. When he got there, of course, he saw Johnny Chuck's new house right away. "Ho!" cried Farmer Brown's boy. "Brer Fox was hunting Chucks. I'll keep my eye on this, and if Mr. Chuck makes any trouble in my garden, I'll know where to catch him." Chapter 19 Johnny Chuck's Pride Ever since Farmer Brown's boy and Reddy Fox had found his new house in the far corner of the old orchard, Johnny Chuck had been worried. It was not that he was afraid for himself. Oh my, no. Johnny Chuck felt perfectly able to take care of himself. But there was Polly Chuck. He was terribly afraid that something might happen to Polly Chuck. You see, she was not big and strong like him, and then Polly Chuck was apt to be careless. So for a while Johnny Chuck worried a great deal. But Reddy Fox didn't come again in daytime. You see, Bowser the Hound had given him such a scare that he didn't dare to. He sometimes came at night and sniffed hungrily at Johnny Chuck's doorway. But Johnny and Polly were safe inside, and this didn't trouble them a bit. And Farmer Brown's boy seemed to have forgotten all about the new house. So, after a while, Johnny Chuck stopped worrying so much. The fact is, Johnny Chuck had something else to think about. He had a secret. Yes, Sir, Johnny Chuck had a secret.
Sammy Jay came up to the Old Orchard almost every morning. His sharp eyes were not long in finding out that Johnny Chuck had a secret, but try as he would, he could not find out what that secret was. Whatever it was, it made Johnny Chuck very happy. He would come out on his doorstep and smile and sometimes give a funny little whistle of pure joy. It puzzled Sammy Jay a great deal. He couldn't see why Johnny Chuck should be any happier than he ever was. To be sure, it was a happy time of year. Everybody was happy, for it was springtime, and the Green Forest and the Green Meadows, even the Old Pasture, were very lovely. But somehow Sammy Jay felt sure that it was something more than this, a secret that Johnny Chuck was keeping all to himself, that was making him so happy. But what it was, Sammy Jay couldn't imagine. He spent so much time thinking about it and wondering what it could be, that it actually kept him out of mischief. One morning Johnny Chuck came out looking happier than ever. He chuckled and chuckled as only a happy Chuck can. Then he did foolish things. He kicked up his heels. He rolled over and over in the grass. He whistled. He even tried to sing, which is something no Chuck can do or should ever try to do. Then suddenly he scrambled to his feet, carefully brushed his coat, and tried to look very dignified. He strutted back and forth in front of his doorway, as if he was very proud of something. There was pride in the very way in which he took each step. There was pride in the very way in which he held his head. It was too much for Sammy Jay.
"What are you so proud about, Johnny Chuck?"
he demanded in his harsh voice.
"If I didn't have a better-looking coat than you've got, I wouldn't put on airs."
You know, Sammy Jay is very proud of his own handsome blue and white coat, and dearly loves to show it off. "Oh, it isn't that," said Johnny Chuck.
"Well, if it is because you think yourself so smart to hide yourself up here in the Old Orchard, let me tell you that I found you out long ago, and so did Reddy Fox, and Bowser the Hound, and Farmer Brown's boy,"
sneered Sammy Jay in the most disagreeable way. "It isn't that," said Johnny Chuck.
"Well, what is it then?"
snapped Sammy Jay.
"That's for you to find out,"
replied Johnny Chuck.
"There's foolish pride and silly pride and pride of low degree. A better pride is honest pride, and that's the pride for me."
And with that, Johnny Chuck disappeared in his new house. Chapter 20. Sammy Jay Understands. It was a beautiful morning. Jolly, round, red Mr. Sun had thrown his bedclothes off very early and started to climb up the sky, smiling his broadest. Old Mother West Wind had swept his path clear of clouds. The Merry Little Breezes, who, you know, are Mother West Wind's children, had danced across the Green Meadows up to the Old Orchard, where they pelted each other with white and pink petals of apple blossoms until the ground was covered. Each apple tree was like a huge bouquet of loveliness. Yes, indeed, it was very beautiful that spring morning. Sammy Jay had gotten up almost as early as Mr. Sun and Old Mother West Wind. As soon as he had swallowed his breakfast, he flew up to the Old Orchard and hid among the white and pink apple blossoms to watch for Johnny Chuck. You see, he knew that Johnny Chuck had some sort of a secret which filled Johnny with very great pride. But what it was, Sammy Jay couldn't even guess, and nothing troubled Sammy Jay quite so much as the feeling that he could not find out the secrets of other people. So he sat very, very still among the apple blossoms and waited and watched. By and by Johnny Chuck appeared on his doorstep. He seemed very much excited, did Johnny Chuck. He sat up very straight and looked this way and looked that way. He looked up in the apple trees, and Sammy Jay held his breath for fear that Johnny would see him. But Sammy was so well hidden that, bright as Johnny Chuck's eyes are, they failed to see him. Then Johnny Chuck actually climbed up on the old stone wall so as to see better, and he sat there a long time, looking and looking. Sammy Jay grew impatient.
He seems to be terribly watchful this morning. I never knew him to be so watchful before. I don't understand it.
muttered Sammy to himself. After a while Johnny Chuck seemed quite satisfied that there was no one about. He hopped down from the old stone wall and scampered over to the doorway of his new house, and there he began to chatter. Sammy Jay stretched his neck until it ached, trying to hear what Johnny Chuck was saying, but he couldn't because Johnny's head was inside his doorway. Pretty soon Johnny Chuck backed out and sat up, and he looked very proud and important. Then Sammy Jay saw something that nearly took his breath away. It was the head of Polly Chuck peeping out of the doorway. It was the first time that he had seen Polly Chuck.
"Why,"
gasped Sammy Jay,
"it must be that Johnny Chuck has a mate, and I didn't know a thing about it. So that's his secret, and the reason he has appeared so proud lately."
Polly Chuck came out on the doorstep. She looked just as proud as Johnny Chuck, and at the same time she seemed terribly anxious. She sat up beside Johnny Chuck, and she looked this way and that way, just as Johnny had. Then she put her head in at the doorway and began to call in the softest voice. In a minute Sammy Jay saw something more. It surprised him so that he nearly lost his balance. It was another head peeping out of the doorway, a head just like Johnny Chuck's, only it was a teeny-weeny one. Then there was another, and another. Polly kept talking and talking in the softest voice, while Johnny Chuck swelled himself up until he looked as if he would burst with pride. Sammy Jay understood now why Johnny Chuck had been so proud for the last few days. It was because he had a family. Sammy looked down at the three little Chucks sitting on the doorstep, trying to sit up the way Johnny Chuck sat, and they looked so funny that Sammy forgot himself and laughed right out loud. In a flash the three little Chucks and Polly Chuck had disappeared inside the house, while Johnny Chuck looked up angrily. He knew that his secret was a secret no longer. End of Section 5. Section 6 of The Adventures of Johnny Chuck. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Adventures of Johnny Chuck by Thornton W. Burgess. Chapter 21. Sammy Jay has a change of heart. There's no one ever quite so bad that somewhere way down deep inside a little goodness does not find a place wherein to creep and hide. It is so with Sammy Jay. Yes, sir, it is so with Sammy Jay. You may think that because Sammy Jay is vain, a troublemaker and a thief, he is all bad. He isn't. There is some good in Sammy Jay, just as there is some good in everybody. If there wasn't, Old Mother Nature never would allow Sammy Jay to go his mischievous way through the Green Forest. He dearly loves to get other people into all kinds of trouble, and this is one reason why nobody loves him. But if you watch out sharp enough, you will find that hidden under that beautiful blue and white coat of his, there really is some good. You may have to look a long time for it, but sooner or later you will find it. Johnny Chuck did. Sammy Jay had already made a lot of trouble for Johnny Chuck. You see, he had been the first of the little forest and meadow people to find Johnny Chuck's new house. And then, just to make trouble for Johnny Chuck, he had told Reddy Fox about it, and after that he had called Bowser the Hound and Farmer Brown's boy over to it. Now he had discovered Johnny Chuck's greatest secret, that Johnny had a family. What a chance to make trouble now! Sammy started for the Green Forest as fast as his wings could take him. He would tell Reddy Fox and Redtail the Hawk. They were very fond of young Chucks. It would be great fun to see the fright of Johnny Chuck and his family when Reddy Fox or Redtail the Hawk appeared. Sammy Jay chuckled wickedly as he flew. When he reached the Green Forest and stopped in his favorite hemlock tree to rest, he was still chuckling. But by that time it was a different kind of a chuckle. Yes, sir, it was a different kind of a chuckle. It was a better chuckle to hear. The fact is, Sammy Jay was no longer chuckling over the thought of the trouble he could make. He was laughing at the memory of how funny those three little baby Chucks had looked sitting up on Johnny Chuck's doorstep and trying to do whatever Johnny Chuck did. The more he thought about it, the more he tickled and laughed. Right in the midst of his laughter along came Redtail the Hawk. Sammy Jay opened his mouth to call to Redtail and tell him about Johnny Chuck's secret. Then he closed it again with a snap.
"I won't tell him yet,"
said Sammy to himself,
"for he might catch one of those baby chicks, and they are such funny little fellows that would really be too bad. I guess I'll wait a while."
And with that, off flew Sammy Jay to hunt for some other mischief. You see, he had had a change of heart. The little goodness way down deep inside had come out of hiding. But of course Johnny Chuck didn't know this, and over in his new house in the far corner of the old orchard, he and Polly Chuck were worrying and worrying, for they felt sure that now everyone would know their secret, and it wouldn't be safe for the dear little baby Chucks to so much as put their funny little noses outside the door. Chapter 22. Johnny Chuck is kept busy. Johnny Chuck is naturally lazy. You see, Johnny has very simple tastes, and usually he is contented. He does not have to go far from his own doorstep to get all he wants to eat. He does not have to hunt for his food, as so many of the little meadow and forest people do, and so he has a great deal of time to sit on his doorstep and watch the world go by and dream pleasant daydreams and grow fat. Now, people who do not have to work usually become lazy. It is the easiest habit in the world to learn and the hardest to get over. And so, because he seldom has to work, Johnny Chuck quite naturally is lazy. But Johnny can work when there really is need of it. No one, unless it is Digger the Badger or Miner the Mole, can dig faster than Johnny Chuck. And when there is real need of working, Johnny works with a will. When he was a very tiny Chuck, Old Mother Chuck had taught him this: "When work there is that must be done, don't fret and whine and spoil the day. The quicker that you do your work, the longer time you'll have to play." Johnny never has forgotten this, and when it is really necessary that he should work, no one works harder than he does. But he always first makes sure that it is necessary work and that he will not be wasting his time in doing foolish, unnecessary things. And now Johnny Chuck was the busiest he had ever been in all his life. If he felt lazy these beautiful spring days, he didn't have time to think about it. No, sir, he actually didn't have time to remember that he is naturally lazy. You see, he had a family to look out for. 3 babies to find sweet, tender young clover for, and to teach all the things that every Chuck should know, and to watch out for, that no harm should come to them. So Johnny Chuck was busy, so busy that he hardly had time to get enough to eat. Every morning Johnny would come out as soon as jolly, round, red Mr. Sun began his daily climb up in the blue, blue sky. He would look this way and look that way to make sure that Reddy Fox or Granny Fox or Redtail the Hawk or Bowser the Hound or any other danger was nowhere near. And he never forgot to look up into the apple trees to make sure that Sammy Jay was not there. Then he would call to Polly Chuck and the 3 baby Chucks. Polly Chuck would come out with a very worried air, and after her would come the 3 funny little baby Chucks, who would roll and tumble over each other on the doorstep. When he thought they had played enough, Johnny Chuck would lead the way along a little private path which he had made through the grass. After him, one behind another, would trot the 3 little Chucks, and behind them would march Polly Chuck to see that none went astray. When they reached the patch of tender, sweet young clover, Johnny Chuck would sit up very straight and still, watching as sharp as he knew how for the least sign of danger. When the 3 little stomachs were full of sweet, tender young clover, he would proudly lead the way home again, and then, as before, he would sit up very straight and watch for danger, while the 3 baby Chucks sprawled out on the doorstep for a sun nap. Oh, those were busy days for Johnny Chuck, and anxious days, too. You see, he had not forgotten that Sammy Jay had found out his secret,
and he hadn't the least doubt in the world that Sammy Jay would tell Reddy Fox. So from the first thing in the morning until the very last thing at night, Johnny Chuck was on the watch for danger. And all the time, though Johnny didn't know it, a pair of sharp eyes were watching him from a snug hiding place in one of the old apple trees. Whose were they? Why, Sammy Jay's, to be sure. You see, Sammy Jay hadn't told Johnny Chuck's great secret after all. Chapter 23. The School in the Old Orchard. Little foxes, little chucks, little squirrels, mice and mink, just like little boys and girls, go to school to learn to think. You didn't know that, did you? Well, it's a fact. Yes, sir, it's a fact. All the babies born in the Green Forest or on the Green Meadows or around the Smiling Pool have to go to school just as soon as they are big enough to leave their own doorsteps. They go to the greatest school in the world, and it is called the School of Experience. Old Mother Nature has charge of it, but the teachers usually are father and mother for the first few weeks, anyway. After that, Mother Nature herself gives them a few lessons, and a very stern teacher she is. They just have to learn her lessons. If they don't, something dreadful is almost sure to happen. Of course, Sammy Jay knew all this because he had had to go to school when he was a little fellow. So Sammy was not much surprised when, from his snug hiding place in one of the old apple trees, he discovered that there was a school in Farmer Brown's old orchard. Johnny Chuck was the teacher, and his 3 baby Chucks were the pupils. Sammy Jay was so interested in that funny little school in the old orchard that he quite forgot to think about mischief. The very first lesson that the 3 little Chucks had to learn was obedience. Johnny Chuck was very particular about that. You see, he knew that unless they learned this first of all, none of the other lessons would do them much good. They must first learn to mind instantly, without asking questions. Dear me, Johnny Chuck certainly did have his hands full, teaching those 3 little Chucks to mind. They were such lively little chaps, and there was so much that was new and wonderful to see, that it was dreadfully hard work to sit perfectly still just because Johnny Chuck told them so. But if they didn't mind instantly, they were sure to have their ears soundly boxed, and sometimes were sent back to the house without a taste of the sweet, tender young clover of which they were so fond. After a few lessons of this kind, they found out that it was always best to obey instantly, and then Johnny began to teach them other things, things which it is very important that every Chuck should know. First, there were signals. When Johnny whistled a certain way, it meant, "A stranger in sight! Possible danger!" Then each little Chuck would sit up very straight and not move the teeniest, weeniest bit, so that from a little distance they looked for all the world like tiny stumps. But all the time their sharp little eyes would be looking this way and that way to see what the danger might be. After a while Johnny would give another little whistle, which meant danger past. Then they would once more begin to fill their little stomachs with sweet, tender young clover. Sometimes, however, Johnny would whistle sharply. That meant run. Then they would scamper as fast as they could along the nearest little path to the house under the old apple tree in the far corner, and never once look around. They would dive head first, one after the other, in at the doorway, and not show their noses outside again until Johnny or Polly Chuck told them they could. Then there was a still different whistle. It meant danger very near, lie low. When they heard that, they flattened themselves right down in the grass just wherever they happened to be, and held their breath and didn't move until Johnny signaled that they might. Of course, there never was any real danger. Johnny was just teaching them so that when danger did come, as it surely would, sooner or later, they would know just what to do. It surely was a funny little school, and sometimes Sammy Jay had hard work to keep from laughing right out. Chapter 24. Sammy Jay proves that he is not all bad.
Sammy Jay hadn't had so much fun for a long time as he found in watching the funny little school in Farmer Brown's old orchard, where Johnny Chuck was teaching his 3 baby Chucks the things that every little Chuck must learn, if he would grow up into a big Chuck. When they had learned to mind without waiting to ask why, and had learned the signals which told them just what to do when danger was near, Johnny began to lead them farther and farther away from home. He took them up along the old stone wall and showed them how to find safe hiding places among the stones. Then he took them off a little way and suddenly gave the danger signal. It was funny, very funny indeed, to see the 3 little Chucks scamper for the old stone wall and crawl out of sight. The first time, 2 of them tried to squeeze into the same hole together, and each was in such a hurry that he wouldn't let the other go first. Then both lost their tempers, and they began to fight about it, quite forgetting that if there was really any danger near, they surely would come to harm. Such a scolding as Johnny Chuck did give those 2 little Chucks! Then he made them try it all over again. Once he found a footprint which Reddy Fox had made in some soft earth during the night, and made each little Chuck smell of it, while he told them all about Reddy and old Granny Fox, and how smart and sly they were, and how very, very fond they were of tender young Chucks for dinner. The 3 little Chucks shivered when they smelled of Reddy's track, and the hair along their backs stood up in a way that was very funny to see. Then Johnny Chuck took them over to the edge of the old orchard, where they could peep out over the Green Meadows. He pointed out old Whitetail the Marsh Hawk sailing back and forth over the meadows, and told them how once, when he was a little Chuck and had run away from home, old Whitetail had nearly caught him. He told them about Farmer Brown's boy, and about Bowser the Hound, and a great many other things that little Chucks should learn about. Now, all the time that Johnny Chuck was teaching these things, he was keeping the sharpest kind of a watch for danger. And there were many times when he would give the danger signal. Then they would all lie flat down in the grass and keep perfectly still, or else scamper as fast as they could along the little paths which Johnny had made, to the safety of the snug home under the old apple tree. But even the most watchful are surprised sometimes. One morning, when Johnny Chuck had led the 3 little Chucks farther from home than usual, Farmer Brown's boy took it into his head to visit the old orchard. Johnny Chuck didn't see him coming. You see, the orchard grass had grown so tall that even when he sat up his very straightest, Johnny could not always see over the top of it. So this morning he failed to see Farmer Brown's boy coming. But Sammy Jay, sitting in his snug hiding place in the top of one of the old apple trees, saw him. At first Sammy Jay's sharp eyes twinkled. There would be some fun now. Perhaps Farmer Brown's boy would catch one of the little Chucks. Sammy Jay could picture to himself the fright of Johnny Chuck with the 3 little Chucks. He fairly hugged himself in delight, for you know Sammy Jay dearly loves to see other people in trouble. Then he thought of all the fun he had had watching those 3 little Chucks learn their lessons, and suddenly the thought of anything happening to them made Sammy Jay feel uncomfortable. Almost without stopping to think, he screamed at the top of his lungs.
Run, Johnny Chuck, run! Here comes Farmer Brown's boy!
And Johnny Chuck ran. He didn't wait to ask questions or even to look. He started the 3 little Chucks ahead of him, and he nipped their heels to make them run faster. And just in time they reached the snug house under the old apple tree in the far corner. Farmer Brown's boy was just in time to see them disappear. He watched Sammy Jay flying over to the Green Forest and screaming,
"Thief! Thief!"
as he flew. "I wonder now if that Jay warned those Chucks purposely," said he as he scratched his head thoughtfully. If Peter Rabbit had been there, he could have told him that Sammy Jay did, for he knows all about Sammy Jay and his tricks. But Peter wasn't there. The fact is, Peter was very busy doing the most foolish of all the foolish things he has ever done, trying to change his name. You may read all about it in the Adventures of Peter Cottontail. You see, it takes a whole book to tell about Peter and his doings.
End of Section 6. And End of The Adventures of Johnny Chuck by Thornton W. Burgess. Recording by John Leader, Bloomington, Illinois.